Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I am reviewing the iFi Go Link DAC. This is a USB-C DAC, but it comes with some adapters. I'll get into all that, but it's a pretty versatile little DAC that retails for $60. Now this was sent to me for review. It won't affect what I say about it. If you do find that you want to purchase this after the review, I will have a link in the description below to help you find that, as well as anything else I mention in case adapters or other DACs interest you as well. So I run a very unbiased, honest channel. You will find that in this video. I basically just share my experiences in addition to the whole technical side of things and, of course, how I think it performs, what it sounds like, all that good stuff. So with that being said, let's get into the specs. Now, the DAC found inside the Go Link is the ESS Sabre DAC, ES9219 DAC. It's a good DAC. It's a very neutral DAC. Some of the other stuff that you typically find in iFi uses Burr Brown, which has a nice, warm, still musical sound to it. And then you have the AKM side, which is a little bit more forward and resolving. ESS is kind of typically in the middle, as is Cirrus Logic, but it really just depends on the implementation. Most modern DACs sound great, and this is no different. But the end result is that this does DSD 256. It has PCM support up to 384 kilohertz, and it has MQA unfolding, which for now is still relevant. Who knows what will happen now that MQA has gone into administration, but there is support for it inside the box. Now, I don't want to go into every single spec about the Go Link because there's just too much to share, and I don't want this video to be a tech jargon reading off a website type thing. There's great information on the site, so if you want to learn more, I suggest doing that. But I do want to highlight a couple extra things. So this can do up to a 2-volt output at 300 ohms, which is great because that means if you're connecting this to a higher powered headphone amp or speaker amplifier at home, you're going to take advantage and get to use that power that you paid for. Something like the Apple dongle has a 1-volt output, so you may not get the same kind of overhead or power output that you could get with something like this. So this does serve as a great DAC to feed more power capable amplifiers, high power capable amplifiers. Other specs that stand out to me is the signal to noise ratio. It's over 125 decibels. Has an output impedance of 0.4 ohms, or just under 0.4 ohms, which means you can drive sensitive, easy to drive IEMs, or because of that power overhead giving you about 70 milliwatts at 32 ohms, you can drive more power hungry headphones like these Focal Stellia, which are very easy to drive, but they handle a lot of power as well. So you often find that at a lower powered DAC, you can basically hit max volume, and these are just chugging along, you know, no harm, no foul, but they're not really kind of being pushed to what they can handle if you want some of those dynamics. So the Go Link has that extra overhead, which is great too. Now there's a couple connection things I want to point out with the Go Link because this is to me what makes the Go Link a better value at this price range than some others. You get to a point where a good basic DAC or dongle like this, you'd be hard pressed to hear a difference, just to be realistic. But packaging, reliability, consistency, all that stuff, that plays a bigger role at this price range. So the Go Link, it is a solid performer. I'll get into the sound performance here shortly, but in the box, you get two awesome adapters. You get a USB-C to Lightning adapter, which means for $60, you have a very good dongle for an iPhone or an iOS device that uses a Lightning port. You also get a USB-A to C adapter. And I tested this on every platform I had. So this works on Android. This works on iOS mobile devices, this works on Windows, and this works on Mac OS, whether you use the USB-A adapter or straight USB-C into your MacBook, for example. All of that works. It gets detected, no problem. Now, from the volume standpoint, what's really cool about this device is it has its own volume control, not like a dedicated button, but some DACs basically run at full volume, and you're using the host volume, the Windows volume, for example, to control the output that's getting into this DAC. Well, with this DAC, Windows or Mac OS, it's going to be setting it full volume, and then your command to adjust the volume is telling this device to adjust its own internal gain. The benefit of that is you typically get a better noise floor, you get better sonic performance from an audibility standpoint, you know, like less of a chance of a hiss. I'm not saying all dongles hiss because of that nature, but the whole goal of that is to just improve the sound quality, and it's more noticeable on quieter songs or a silent part of a track. Now, there's a couple interesting things I want to point out with the output side, because this can be confusing. If you take away one thing, this is probably one of the most important pieces I learned about the Go Link. This output is output only. It's a 3.5 millimeter jack that does not support any microphone input. That's not like an end of the world thing, but I think that some of the readings, if you look at the spec sheets, can be confusing because they make mention of TRRS, which most people associate as a mic input. I know I did because I tried different headsets, different equipment to see if I can get a mic detection to work at first. What I found out was it's using a 3.5 millimeter jack that is capable of TRRS to serve as a balanced capacity. There are the design of this DAC does support a balanced output because it'll have the 4-pin connection basically. You can still connect a standard TRS jack, which means the negatives are shared between both sides, the ground if you will, and then they have a unique positive. That's how you get 3 pins. On a 4-pin, you have a dedicated negative for each channel. There are adapters online. I don't think you need to buy specific balanced dedicated cables, but there are adapters that can turn your 3.5 millimeter balanced into a 4-pin female XLR if you want to run a larger headphone with a bigger balance jack. And there are also adapters out there to turn a 3.5 balanced into a 4.4 balanced or Penacon connection. So keep that in mind. There is no mic support whether you use this on an iPhone, a Windows machine, even a PlayStation. This does get detected on PlayStation, but there's no headset support. On that note, real quick, PlayStation volume is lower significantly than what this can do elsewhere, so do not buy the Go Link to be used on a PS5. Now, another cool party trick to the iFi Go Link is the status light on top, which does change color depending on what it's decoding. Green is PCM up to 96 kilohertz. Yellow PCM from 176 to 384 kilohertz. Magenta is MQA, and then cyan is DSD up to 128, and blue is DSD up to 256. The light changes within a second or so of changing tracks, and that does also apply to an iPhone, which was a pleasant surprise. So even if you're using the lightning adapter and you go in and out of from, let's say, a hi-fi track to a master track, I noticed the LED was changing as well. I typically saw the magenta or the green depending on what track I was listening to, but it's good to see that it works on other platforms, not just something like Windows. So I want to do something different when it comes to the sound quality and performance side and kind of focus more on pros and cons that I noticed with this DAC as a whole. Not only from a sonic standpoint, like an audio performance standpoint, but actually using it and living with it every day. I will mention some competitors, so I actually grabbed a few other dongles to talk about as well. And I'd be lying if I told you that you will hear a drastic difference in sound quality from a decent $10 dongle like an Apple dongle going into the Go Link if you were blindfolded and you listened to music at the exact same decibel level, which would have to be slightly lower to match the maximum output of the Apple dongle. You'd be hard pressed to find a major difference. You typically don't hear as much of a difference until you get into higher end DACs and amps that have some kind of significant upgrade, whether it's from a performance standpoint, power output, or tubes because they're coloring the sound, things like that. A good digital DAC should be transparent, and this is, so that's a good thing. I'm not noticing any artifacts or weird performance issues. What stands out when you get the Go Link, and this is, so I'll talk about the Bolt after because that's more expensive. The Apple dongle is a $10 DAC, and at very easy to drive things like a headphone, this is specific to an iPhone, of course, you're going to have great performance. It's a fairly cheap, robust, and measurably great performing little DAC. The downside of that is obviously this particular one doesn't work on Windows, and then if you get the USB-C variant and try to use it on Android, your power output is extremely low. If you get the European version, your power output is even lower, and even the US spec caps out at only 1 volt. So the issue with the Apple dongle is that you need to get more than one depending on your device, and it is a much lower maximum volume output. So I wouldn't really recommend it for something like a larger headphone. Then you get into something like the Truth Air Shio. And this has a nice finish. It has a leather wrapped exterior, which is adhesive. I have one little corner starting to peel, and it has a real balanced output, a 4.4 millimeter balanced out. Physical volume buttons, which is awesome, and I like that it's detachable, but it too does not work on an Apple device, on an iPhone. So again, limitations with that. The noticeable upgrade when you get into the Go Link, and I do want to show you this cable. I didn't mention this earlier. Look how soft and flexible that is. Some people will like that. Some people will think it makes it feel cheaper, but I like having a low resistance cable because you're not putting any pressure on either side. This is going to relieve a lot of stress off the jack. Now, just to be clear, the most noticeable thing getting into the Go Link, for those who are concerned about sound quality, is how much power and robust sound delivery this has. I could tell you with certainty that when you see or experience, when you hear how well this DAC performs, if you were blindfolded, you would think you're listening to a larger powered headphone amp. Because when you get into higher end headphone amplifiers, your advantages start to get more on like just the sheer output capability, the decibels. They have external power supply. They get crazy loud. But if you're not listening to it that loud, you don't need all that extra power. So from an audio performance standpoint, when you listen to how good this is from a bass delivery, because that's where the Shio struggles. If you have a dynamic punchy headphone like the Focal Stellia, which is not a cheap headphone, it's held back by the Shio because it can only drive it so hard. The balanced mode helps get more power output, but what became apparent to me was on headphones like that, this sounded more lively and awake, and it really let these things hit the way they're supposed to. That's incredibly important. So it really comes down to what you are planning on connecting this to and what your expectations are for performance. Are you just getting inexpensive IEMs and you're connecting to a phone? Well, maybe an inexpensive dongle will be fine. But if you want the versatility of the Go Link and you're connecting to different devices, all of these adapters and capability is great, but then you also get that extra overhead. So that's part of what you're paying for. Now, I just want to do a quick shout out to the Helm Bolt, which is 3.5 millimeter only as well. This too does not work on an Apple device like an iPhone, but it does support TRRS, just like the Apple dongle. So if you need a mic input, you may need to consider different DACs. This is significantly more expensive, and from an audio performance standpoint, doesn't really sound any better. They have a THX amplifier in it versus iFi's own internal circuitry. But from a music standpoint, I really like the way the iFi DAC sounds. They're both great, but when you're looking at double the price, if you don't need that capability, the Go Link represents a better value. So what I have an issue with on the Go Link, one of my only nitpicks really, is how tight this headphone jack is. To a point where I've used this for a while. I don't do my reviews until I've used equipment for quite a period of time. When you push this in, there's so much tension, I can actually slide the internal parts of the DAC out of the back. You could kind of see it coming out. Look how I'm pushing so hard. And you can see right here, hopefully the camera's getting that, the back of the DAC comes out towards the USB side. I can actually push it back in. So mine is a little bit loose. Now if I plug it in holding the back, it's not going to move. But I do get nervous about the long-term effects of this tension. I think it's a little over the top. And then if you're unplugging it, you don't really want to unplug it holding the outside edge of the chassis. I strongly recommend putting your fingers on the front, so when you pull it out, you're helping hold that piece in place, because I have no idea what over time happens if you keep doing that push and pull effect, if it's going to wear out whatever is gripping and holding this stuff together. So I don't want to keep anything from you. To me, that was kind of an odd issue because it's a headphone jack, and in most cases, all the other iFi products I reviewed, they had a normal tension to them. This is the first one I've seen that's been this stiff. One of the other little things I noticed, just to point out, is when you connect a dongle like this to a phone, and you have this much of a straight jack sticking out, you can see that there's a little bit more wiggle. You do have to be careful. This is just a physics thing. When you have a straight bar coming out of a mobile device like that, this isn't something I would suggest putting in your pocket. It's better to sit outside, resting on a desk or wherever it may be. So that's just the nature of it. This wasn't any looser than using an actual Apple dongle. It's just because it's longer, it kind of exaggerates how much movement there really is. So just be careful not to put too much pressure on it. All right, so that about wraps up the review. And I think if you know that the headphone jack is tight and there's no microphone input, you get everything else that you're looking for. I mean, there's pros and cons to every device out there. I think the pros are that for $60, you're actually getting great sonic performance. I was driving these beyond a comfortable listening volume, which speaks a lot for what you're getting for $60. Then you factor in the versatility that I can connect this to an Android device, an iPhone, Mac, or Windows machine. Suddenly it becomes very compelling at $60. There is a noticeable benefit to the sound quality simply from an overhead standpoint over something like the Truth Air Shio or the Apple dongle. The Shio tends to distort a little bit at max volume, whereas this can exceed that volume with zero audible distortion. So it's a great listening experience. It's not perfect, but I don't think a single product is at any price range for the most part because we're all looking for different things. So anyway, I hope you found the video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next one. With that being said, I'll see you next time. Bye.